welcome to a session on the draft Land and Water Regional Plan. I'm just going to hand over to Councillor Forbes to open the meeting.
Kia ora koutou. We'll start with a karakia. Tuia ki ronga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki roto, tuia ki te here tangata. Ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, haumi e, hui e, taiki e.
Thank you.
And welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you all, and welcome to the people we've got. John Cox, Kirsty Sharp, Kyle, hello to you. The rest of us are mostly ORC people and Ōkaha people and Kaitahu. And we do welcome you along and look forward to a great discussion. Back to you, Fleur.
Good, thanks. I will just start sharing some slides that we've got. Is that sharing the right thing?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. Oops, that wasn't what I meant to do, sorry. Sorry.
So what are you planning, Fleur? Is this taking us through a slideshow and then we start having a discussion? Is that what
That's
happens?
right. Yep. Thank you. Yeah. Before we get into the slideshow, I thought we would just introduce ourselves so that you know so that the public knows who's talking to them and who we've got on screen here. So Ko Fleur Matthews tōku ingoa. I'm the manager of policy and planning at Otago Regional Council, and we've got quite a crew here of experts to help answer questions as we go. And yeah, I'll just run through who's here so that you know. Starting, you've met Councillor Forbes. Next, we've got Kate Wilson. Councillor Wilson, if you want to just introduce yourself.
Kia ora, from Middlemarch, Moronui constituency. Glad to be listening in.
Kia ora, thanks. Edward.
Kia ora koutou, ko Edward Ellis in Taku ingoa. I'm an iwi rep on the Environmental Science and Policy Committee for the iwi, co-chair in fact, and live in Dunedin.
Tim.
I'm involved in Noah. I'm a planner with Ōkaha, which works on behalf of Kataho Whanui, and we're working alongside the Regional Council on developing the Land Water Plan.
Next, I'll go to Delina.
Good evening. My name is Delina Lee. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Otago Regional Council, and I'm working on the Land and Freshwater Plan.
Sam.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. My name's Sam Walton and I'm a policy analyst, and I'm also working on the Land and Freshwater Plan.
Tom.
Kia ora koutou. Tom de Balsmaker, team leader for Freshwater and Land, working together with Sam, Amber, Delina, and also with Tim from Ōkaha on the Land and Water Plan.
Hugo.
Kia ora. I'm Hugo Borges. I'm the lake scientist at Otago Regional Council, and I'm working on the State of the Environment program across the region.
Amber.
Oh, hi everyone. My name's Amber Smith. I'm a policy analyst in the Land and Freshwater team at the council.
Sammy.
Kia ora, good afternoon. I'm Sami Khan, working with Higo. I'm also a freshwater scientist and based in the Dunedin office.
And Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Horton. I'm the project manager for the Land and Water Regional Plan.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So today, we will be taking you through a few slides. So I'll be starting off by giving a brief overview of what the Land and Water Regional Plan is for, where we're at in the process, and what this round of community engagement is all about. And then I'll pass on to Tom, who will provide an overview of the draft provisions, focusing on those most relevant to the Upper Lakes Rohe. And then we'll open up the floor for questions. You can ask a question at any time during the presentation. Just put any questions into the Q&A part of the chat. And if you've got any kind of comments, so if you're having any technical difficulties or whatever, just feel free to put it in the chat part. As you were notified, we are recording this session, and that will likely be uploaded to our website and made public. So just bear that in mind if you don't want to be in that situation. Any questions before we start? I can't actually see if there's any hands up or anything, but so. Oh, just the other thing I would say is if you wanted to, if you want to kind of follow along with the rules as we go, feel free to jump on our website at that address there, orc.govt.nz/landwater. And yeah, you can pull up lots of information. There's a lot more detail than what's in the slides here. So just if you're interested, that's the place to go. Okay, so this slide sets out the national and regional legislative framework that we're working under to develop the Land and Water Regional Plan. So under the Resource Management Act, there are 3 types of national instruments that are relevant to regional freshwater planning. So one's the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, another's the National Environmental Standards for Freshwater, and finally the Water Conservation Orders. So in 2019, the Minister for the Environment told us we could do better to manage Otago's lakes, rivers and streams, and directed ORC to prepare a new regional policy statement and a land and water plan. Then in 2020, the government introduced a revised national direction for freshwater, which was a paradigm shift for how freshwater is managed right across New Zealand. So ORC began by preparing a new regional policy statement to give effect to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, which was notified in 2021. And the regional policy statement sets out the visions for freshwater in the different areas of Otago, and the Land and Water Regional Plan needs to give effect to this regional policy statement. The draft plan has been developed in partnership with mana whenua, ensuring that there's a shared focus on freshwater management. The plan will set new rules about how we as a community achieve the freshwater visions to protect Otago's precious waterways for future generations. So Te Mana o Te Wai is the fundamental concept that underpins freshwater management in New Zealand. It's a water-centric approach to managing freshwater and sets out a hierarchy of obligations with the primary focus on protecting the health and well-being of the water body and the ecosystems that rely on it. So it's pretty integral to what we've done in the Land and Water Plan. Just moving to the purpose of engagement. So yeah, basically we need your input. The community input we've had to date has been instrumental in shaping the draft Land and Water Regional Plan. In previous consultation on the values, environmental outcomes and activities in 2021 and 2022, we got really great feedback on what's important to Otago. So we've incorporated these values into the draft plan, and now we're asking the community what you think about how we're proposing to protect those values. As I said earlier, there's a lot of information on the website, and we have tried to break it up as much as possible so that you can just focus on giving feedback on the things that are of interest to you. We're running drop-in sessions throughout Otago, where we've got people available to talk through feedback and answer people's questions. Today's session is focused on the Upper Lakes, and particularly with a Queenstown focus, the Upper Lakes Rohe, but Tom will talk a little bit more about what that means. But yeah, it's a little bit different to the other sessions because we're kind of doing this sort of PowerPoint rather than drop-in session. So, but we will aim to answer the questions kind of as we go through the Q&A mechanism. But really the key point is that we want you to provide your feedback through the online feedback form, and this really is the best way to make sure that we know what you think. The form is pretty flexible in that it lets you complete as much or as little of it as you want. There's no mandatory field, so if you don't want to complete something, you just miss it out and hit submit, and it's done. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible. So just before I hand over to Tom, I did think it would be useful to briefly cover what's included in a regional plan, just to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page about what we're here for. So a regional plan consists of objectives, policies and rules. An objective in a regional plan is a broad statement of what the plan aims to achieve. It outlines the desired outcomes for a particular aspect of resource management within the region. And they're typically high level and provide kind of a sense of direction for the plan. Policies are specific guidelines and principles that support the objectives. So they provide a framework for decision making and help to achieve the desired outcomes. These policies help guide resource consent applications within the region. So decisions about resource consents will refer to policies to help decide how the decision's made. And then finally, rules are the more detailed and specific part of the regional plan. So they outline specific standards, requirements, or restrictions that must be followed when using or developing land and natural resources within the region. They are the enforceable part and are used to regulate and control various activities to make sure there's compliance with the objectives and policies of the plan. So generally today we'll be kind of more focusing on rules rather than the other things, but it's worth noting that the objectives and policies kind of guide how the rules are implemented. So under the Resource Management Act, there are 6 different activity statuses which are listed out there, ranging from the most permitted activities through to the most restrictive status, which is prohibited. So in the draft plan, we've primarily used permitted, controlled and discretionary, but we would like feedback on whether those are the appropriate activity statuses for different activities. And just finally, here, the Resource Management Act sets out the process that we must go through to make a regional plan, and the key steps of that are set out in this diagram here. The key point to note here is that we will be notifying the plan by the 30th of June 2024. And that's when it will become a proposed plan and is kind of the first step of the formal Resource Management Act process. At that point, parties can make submissions and present to a hearings panel on the things they support and oppose within the proposed plan. The plan will be going through a freshwater planning process, and that requires that decisions are made 2 years after the date of notification of the plan. Any questions on any of that before I hand over to Tom? All right, thanks, Tom. You're on mute, Tom.
Not a good start. Thank you, Fleur. Anyway, over the next couple of minutes, what I plan to do is to take you through the plan, give you a little bit of an overview of what's included in the plan and how it might impact you or your community. We currently have a regional plan. It's called the Regional Plan Water, and its successor is called Land and Water Regional Plan, and the name change kind of indicates a change in the scope. And so we're actually trying to be not just more proactive and more effective, but also manage a wider range of activities. So we thought it would be a good idea to kind of give an overview of the different types of activities that are going to be managed in the plan, but also how we're managing or how we're going to manage those activities and how they might impact you. And what we mean with that is not necessarily give you an overview of the financial cost or the economic cost. We'll do that, and that will be included in the section 32 analysis. But for the purposes of this meeting, we thought it would be good to help create an understanding of what are the things that you can actually keep on doing under the new plan? What are the things that we want you to stop doing? And what are the things or what are the practices that we would like you to change so you can keep on, so you can continue certain activities as well? So if we can move on to the next slide. So when you open up the new plan, what you'll see is the things that you'll expect to see, like there will be a foreword and there will be an introduction. There will be, like the current plan, a description of the region, glossary, table of contents. There will also be a mana whenua chapter that kind of sets out the important values and the outcomes and policies that need to provide for mana whenua values. But then you'll also see a number of chapters where you'll see a big change from the current plan. And the first one is probably the chapter that sets out the strategic policy direction. And what we mean with the strategic policy direction, it's basically a number of overarching objectives and policies, or you could call them principles, that will apply at all times. So that we need to consider regardless which activity we're considering under the plan. So there will be a chapter with that policy direction, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. We'll also have a chapter that manages activities associated with primary production. So different types of farming, dairy farming, dry stock farming, but not just pasture farming, but also horticulture and arable, and then different types of forestry, permanent forestry, as well as plantation forestry. Obviously, we'll have a chapter as well that deals with water quantity. So that will set out the framework for allocating water from rivers, streams, lakes, and aquifers as well. We'll have a chapter around the topic of activities on beds of lakes and rivers. And that's a broad range of activities. It will deal with establishment or maintenance of structures in riverbeds. It will deal with the construction of culverts, bridges, but also gravel extraction and flood mitigation works or flood management works. Another topic that will have its own chapter is the damming and diversion of water. So that will be a chapter that manages how we dam water, not just in the in stream, but also out of stream. And that manages diversions. And diversions are basically an activity where we kind of change the course of water. And sometimes you can change the course of water in a riverbed, but sometimes that can happen outside a riverbed as well. There will also be a chapter that deals with earthworks and drilling. That is a little bit new. That's actually a land use, and traditionally district plans have been managing earthworks, but because earthworks and drilling can have impacts on water quality, we thought it would be a good idea to actually have some provisions in our plan as well that manage those activities. Then there will be a topic around other discharges. Again, it's a chapter that is going to manage a wide range of different types of discharges. So that will include discharges of fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, hazardous substances, but also oddities like discharges from swimming pools, and cemeteries. So there's all these little things that we put in that chapter. Obviously, there will be a chapter around the management of stormwater discharges, a chapter around management of wastewater discharges as well. I think we can move on to the next slide. And a chapter on the management of solid waste. And solid waste, that means landfills, clean fills, green waste, and composting as well. And then finally, we'll have a chapter around the topic of management of wetlands. So all those different topic areas will have their own chapter. But there's also a number of topics that won't have their own chapter. And examples of that are threatened species and outstanding water bodies. And they're basically topics that will be managed through provisions that sit in all of those chapters that I mentioned above. So, for example, in the rules for allocating water, there will be conditions that seek to ensure that we actually look after threatened species, or that we also manage the impacts of water takes on outstanding water bodies. And then finally, there's a third category of topics that won't sit in the region-wide chapters, but that have their own, what we call FMU chapters or ROHE chapters. And those are the topics of values and environmental outcomes, and also monitoring sites that are, and target attribute states. I mentioned the term FMU chapters or ROHE chapters. FMU stands for Freshwater Management Unit. In the past, we tend to manage activities on a region-wide scale. When you look at the current plan, we most of our rules, by and large, apply across the region. We've got a few that are specific to certain areas or certain catchments. But for the most part, our plan is actually region-wide, literally. Under new national direction, we are strongly encouraged to kind of change tact. We can still have region-wide provisions, and in fact, the majority of the provisions in the new land and water plan will be region-wide. But we also are encouraged to set provisions that apply to certain areas, freshwater management units. So what we did a couple of years ago was basically look at the region and split them up into freshwater management units. And you can see them on the map on the slide. We have 5 freshwater management units. There's no silver bullet for coming up with a clear criteria to define them. It was a hard task, but eventually we thought it would be good to kind of look at similarities between catchments in terms of their land use and in terms of their climate, their communities, the type of water bodies as well, or the values. And so what we did was group a number of catchments in the southernmost part of the region together in the Catlins FMU, North Otago as well. We saw that there's quite similar catchments, all of them kind of discharging in the sea, and commonalities in terms of land use, a lot of dairying. So we thought we grouped that into the North Otago FMU. We also have an FMU for the Tardy catchment and an FMU for a range of smaller catchments, mostly urbanized or around urban regions, around urban centers, around Dunedin, and also further south, and that's the Dunedin and Coast FMU. And then finally, our 5th one is the Clutha Mata'ao FMU. But that one, again, is so big, it's so diverse, that we thought it would be good to split it up into sub-FMUs, which we call ROHE, which means area. And one of them, the northernmost one, is the Upper Lakes ROHE. And that's the one that's actually the subject of today's meeting, or at the center of today's meeting. So we'll focus on that one. And if you can move to the next slide. Here you can see on your right a map of the Upper Lakes ROHE. It's basically the catchment of the Clutha Mata'ao from the headwaters up until the outlets of the three big lakes, Lake Whakatipu, Lake Wanaka, and Lake Hawea. You can't really see it on the map, but it includes most of Queenstown, urbanized area, but not the Frankton area. And the same applies to Wanaka. It includes the majority of Wanaka. It doesn't include the area around called Ballantyne Road, because that's part of the Cadrona catchment, actually. That's it in Dunstan Rohe. It also doesn't include the Hawea Township and Albertown, because that again sits in the Dunstan Rohe. And now I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the land uses. Like I said before, we looked at land uses when we kind of devised the boundaries of those rohe. When we look at the Upper Lakes one, we see that nearly half of it is actually conservation land. There's also large parts of the rohe that are extensively farmed, but mostly dry stock farming, sheep and beef and deer. There's not a lot of irrigation going on at all at the moment. It is also the rohe that has the biggest surface area that is occupied by lakes and rivers, 11%. And then only a very small part of the rohe is actually urban land use. But that's the bit where we're very interested in, because that's where we see the biggest change. Like in the last couple of decades, that area has expanded quite a bit. Moving on to the next slide. So when we look at how those different land uses have impacted freshwater and freshwater health, it's kind of reflected in that, because there's relatively low levels of development. We see that most of the water bodies are actually in a very good condition. So like the lakes have excellent water quality. The rivers as well, they're typically good to excellent water quality. Although in the past decade, we have seen some degradation, and often that degradation kind of reflects changes in land use, for example, urban growth. So we do see a number of small spots where, there are some issues with certain contaminants. And so those contaminants are, when it comes to rivers, primarily E. coli, nitrogen and periphyton. Lakes, it's total phosphorus and total nitrogen and chlorophyll A. And for groundwater, it's actually arsenic. Now, what I would typically do for most other FMUs of rohe is kind of give an overview of the FMU specific rules that would apply. And when we started developing the plan, we actually had a number of rules that were specific to the Upper Lakes. And so we had rules that actually were specifically tailored at preventing or managing intensification and land use change. So we had rules around the conversion of forestry to farming land. We had rules around conversion to dairy farming and dairy support, and also around establishment of forestry. But when we started looking at other FMUs, we thought, well, this is needed for other FMUs as well. So we still have those rules, but through the process of developing this plan, they have actually been uplifted and they apply now across the region, because intensification is actually something that we need to manage region-wide. So at the moment, like I said, there's no specific rules for this rohe, but it is something that we are welcome to, and we would welcome any feedback on that. So if you think there's certain rules or provisions, or it might be a policy that is needed for this rohe, feel free to provide that to us in your feedback. Right. Now, as I said, or as Fleur said at the start, we'll give you an overview of the provisions that apply region-wide. We're not going to take you through all the different chapters. What we did was kind of select those topics that we think are most relevant to the issues that you would expect in this rohe. But happy, once we've gone through the presentation, to dive into other subjects as well. So the first one is strategic policy direction. Basically what this does is policies that make sure that all the parts of the plan work together to give effect to Te Mana Atu Wai. And Fleur explained that concept to you, so I won't say much about it, other than, you know, what we want to do is in every decision that we make around granting consents, make sure that we look after the health of rivers, freshwater and freshwater ecosystems first. And after that, we'll prioritize the health of people, like the health needs of people, like providing good drinking water. That's the second priority. Other uses are subordinate on that. So they're a third priority, and they can only be provided for if we actually have healthy water and good, and if we provide for people's health needs. Another aspect of that strategic direction is managing resources in an integrated way. Kiutakitai, which means from mountains to the sea. And there's different aspects to that term integration. It means that we kind of look at the interactions between what's happening on land and freshwater. It also means that we're looking at the interactions between water quality and water quantity, because the two are strongly linked. It also means that we look at the effects not just in the water body that is near the activity, but we're also looking at the impacts downstream and even on the coast. A third aspect is responding to climate change. Climate change is very topical, has been actually for a couple of years, but what it means is that the impacts that we'll see from certain activities will likely change as a result of climate change. That's one thing. The other thing is also that the availability of a resource might change. And so we want to make sure that any available information around climate change, any forecasts, that they can be taken into account to the decision-making process for resource consents. Also, we'll have some policy around how we manage uncertainties in decision-making. And what I mean with uncertainties is a lack of information or contradicting information. In the past, that has often led to a situation where if we didn't have conclusive evidence to turn down an application, we kind of granted it. But now the direction that we have from national policy statements is that we actually need to be more cautious. And if there is no conclusive evidence that an activity won't have an impact or more than minor impact on the environment, we should actually not allow for that activity. So be more cautious. And then finally, recognize the need for transitions in resource use. Some of the changes under this new plan will be quite significant compared to the current plan, but that means that communities and people need to adapt as well. And so while we still need to make sure that we achieve our outcomes within set timeframes, we also want to allow for some transition within that timeframe. Unless there's any questions around that, move on to the next slide. Wastewater. We thought this is one of the topics that communities in this rohe might be interested in. There's 3 different types of wastewater that we can manage. The first type is discharges of reticulated networks. Second one is wastewater discharges associated with on-site systems, and we commonly refer to that as septic tanks, but more and more so This includes also composting toilets, and then waste that is associated with trade and industrial premises. The plan currently manages all of these, but not always in the most effective way. When we look at discharges of wastewater from reticulated networks, and you'll be quite aware of that, we sometimes, or more often than we would like to, see sewage overflows. It is not uncommon, especially, and it's becoming a bigger risk because of climate change as well. And we also see that a lot of the existing networks actually still discharge to water. Going forward, that is something that we want to change. So we'll have strong policy direction that actually requires phasing out any discharges to water by 2045. You may think this is a long transition timeframe, but we're often dealing with territorial authorities as well. They need to plan for these kind of infrastructure upgrades. For new systems, we will actually ask that, or require that, those systems discharge to land as opposed to water. And then also when it comes to avoiding sewage overflows, we'll have provisions in the plan that make sure that the risk of those overflows is minimized when dealing with new systems. And when it comes to existing systems, make sure that any upgrades to those systems are made to reduce the risk of those overflows. When it comes to on-site wastewater management, we did an audit a couple of years ago, and what we found is especially the older systems are very poorly managed. And we also don't have any rules in our current plan around composting toilets. So basically going forward, septic tanks, whether they're new or existing, they are still permitted, but they'll be subject to stronger conditions, more stringent conditions that seek to avoid any adverse effects from them. Where they are located near certain areas, such as drinking water zones or near bores, we will actually require consent as well, because in those circumstances, they pose a higher risk. And also in the plan, we'll have new rules for discharges from composting toilets as well. Discharges from trade and industrial waste, at the moment, we're requiring a consent. This is one area where we thought we can actually, when we have a good permitted activity rule, we can allow some of those smaller discharges to occur as a permitted activity, provided that they meet certain conditions. Larger discharges will still require a consent. And similar to how we manage wastewater from reticulated networks, we want those types of waste discharges from trade and industrial premises to discharge, to go to land, basically, and no longer go to water. So that was wastewater.
Just before you move on, Tom, there was a question about land application of wastewater, on-site wastewater management in particular, and protecting bogs and other particularly sensitive landforms. I don't know if you want to just talk to that briefly.
Actually, the expert in this area is amongst us, and that's Amber. Amber, do you have any?
Well, I guess I'm assuming a bog would be kind of like a wetland, that type of area. Is that what you would say, Tom? So I would say that we will be requiring consent if a new on-site wastewater treatment system is within 50 metres of any surface water, which would absolutely include a wetland. So we're definitely going to be protecting all water bodies from those discharges. And if it was within 50 metres of, say, a lake edge or a river or a stream, then we would be assessing the type of system that's required to ensure that the discharges are well treated before they go into the soil and eventually into the groundwater. Developing a database of on-site systems, new and old. We are thinking about that in terms of information requirements. And ideally in the future, we would like to have a database of systems for Otago, keeping in mind there's currently approximately over 15,000 of these systems. So that's probably something that will be worked on, not necessarily in time for this plan, but certainly we're wanting to gather that data, you know, so that for the next plan we've got that data in front of us. And yeah, you're very welcome, John, if you wanted to unmute your mic and respond or ask any further questions. Happy to hear that as well.
Thank you, Amber. I will. The questions were intended to be two separate ones. I'll speak firstly to the on-site, and I do note that the definition in the proposed plan is for on-site wastewater system and land application system, the two being needed to give effect to the type of wastewater management. So I'm involved with, well, I'm a wastewater engineer, interested particularly in on-site, and involved with Water New Zealand Special Interest Group on-site wastewater management. The group has a concern that nationally on-site systems and the associated land application systems are not being given sufficient regulatory attention. And amongst that group, and also in a recent New Zealand Land Treatment Collective conference, those specialising in these areas registered concerns. So the group has an interest in supporting regional councils in developing national consistency, particularly around the New Zealand standard 1547. So yeah, any guidance, how we can support you in any way would be welcomed. So that was the first question around, well, the lead on to the first question, and knowing where systems are and how many. I understand some regional councils are actually developing databases. It's a big task, I know, as you're pointing out. The second question about bogs and similarly sensitive landforms relates to, I think, in the conservation estate and elsewhere, reserves and so forth, where very sensitive areas can be damaged by vehicles in particular, but also mountain bikes and walkers. And I note that in different conservation parks particularly, or conservation areas, and whether it's quite a separate topic, there will be provision in the plan to protect these areas or promote their protection.
It's Tom here. I think it's quite a different topic. This is not related to on-site wastewater. Correct. I'm happy to kind of look into it because that would be covered under beds of lakes and rivers. I'm happy to look into it. I believe we've got some provisions around vehicle access, but obviously mountain bikes would probably not fall underneath that. And especially in the conservation estate, the risk of those kind of disturbances from vehicles are probably less than from just mountain bikes or motorbikes or I'll have a look into the plan and plan provisions, and I'll get back to you on that one. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. And again, just emphasize that point, if there's any way we as the Water New Zealand special interest group on on-site systems can provide informational support in some way. We welcome that opportunity.
Thank you, John. I do have a few contacts at Water New Zealand, and I have attended some of their webinars to date. So I'm definitely aware of all the information that's there, and I'll absolutely reach out.
Thanks,
thank you for that.
And just the fact that you bring it onto our radar is very helpful. So thank you. Right. Shall we move on to stormwater?
Sorry.
Kate Wilson has her hand up.
Yeah. Sorry, John is an absolute expert on these things, and so I just want to get in check with him, if he's still there. John, the direction of travel you think this should be going is tougher, or I just want to check the direction that you think, or where you think the regional council should be going with septic tanks slightly more clearly.
I think the promoting New Zealand Standard 1547 and its provisions, and in saying that, it has a provision that on-site wastewater management comprises two systems: an on-site system, treatment system, and a land application system. I think that this standard is poorly understood, and there's a need for training in what it means and how to apply it. So I do think for ORC, developing that expertise in the use of the standard is important. And certainly for a database, it's a complementary information, and the old adage, you can't manage what you don't know, fundamentally important to build a database of on-site systems. It's a slow process maybe, but it is being, as I understand, being done in other regions. So whether that helps, Kate.
I've got one other question. I'm just really interested in how you do that, because do you have priority areas that are more sensitive that you start off first, in which case it could be a transition or staged approach rather than doing carte blanche right across Otago and then taking action? So do you go to those areas that are most at risk first, or do you just do the carte blanche database and act when you see something might be wrong, or how do you know if it's wrong?
I think developing the database is step one, and there are sources of information that will contribute. For example, all new systems must be consented under the Building Act. So no doubt territorial authorities have that information. The harder part is old systems. And as you will know, some old systems, nobody knows where they are. It takes a lot of groundwork. However, that database can identify areas where on-site systems are known to exist because there are houses. So I think the first step is getting the database, and that will greatly facilitate correlating suspected issues with on-site systems or contamination issues with systems. And so I think the database is number one. It's understanding, having that knowledge.
Thanks, John. It's just some areas, especially the Upper Lakes, which are so special. It does intrigue me that may be an area. Be interested in Edward's views on that, or Okaha's, if there are priority areas. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you ready?
Oh yeah, I'm ready. But in the meantime, I found the answer to John's second question. which is basically we do have a provision in the plan that seeks to manage disturbances by machinery or wheeled vehicles, which I believe bicycles and motorbikes would fall under, to not change the profile of a bed, not cause any changes to the clarity of water, avoid nesting habitat of indigenous species, and obviously avoid threatened species habitat as well. However, it's not mirrored in the wetlands provision, so it applies to streams and rivers. So I'll flag that because I believe a bog is a wetland type. So I'll flag that with the planners as well as something to look into as to whether it's appropriate to mirror that. Okay, onto stormwater. The current plan is very permissive, like whether it's a discharge of stormwater from a reticulated system or not, there's basically no consent required in any circumstances. Going forward, the approach that we plan to take is when it comes to discharges of stormwater from reticulated networks, we actually do want a consent. We think that's appropriate given the range of contaminants that might be picked up by stormwater. But we also recognize that there's a need for a transition. So therefore, there will be a two-staged approach. So when the plan becomes operative, network operators can apply for a short-term consent, 5 years. That kind of helps them to basically understand their own network, map it, and monitor the types of discharges and the volumes that are being discharged through those networks. And then when it comes to the stage where they apply for a second consent, they basically need to provide us with a stormwater management plan, and they need to comply with that as well. That seeks to manage the volumes of stormwater, which is again very relevant in light of the increased frequency and severity of rainfall events, and also the water quality impacts. When it comes to discharges of non-reticulated stormwater, we will require consent for certain types, particularly discharges of stormwater from, again, commercial and industrial sites. And the same applies to them. We'll require them to comply with a stormwater management plan and manage the types of contaminants that are being discharged as well as the volumes. Maybe move on to the next slide. Earthworks is something that, especially in the upper Clutha region, not necessarily Upper Lakes, but broader than the upper Clutha region, that has come to our attention, particularly around areas that are fast growing, a lot of residential development, a lot of earthworks going on, and in the past we've seen some discharges of sediment into some of those more pristine water bodies. So a couple of years ago, we actually started developing a plan change to the current plan to start addressing those issues. So we had a plan change that inserted rules to manage earthworks associated with residential development. And that was actually a permitted activity rule, but setting certain limits, for example, around volume. In the new plan, we want to retain that, but also refine it. And when I mean refine, it means broadening the scope, Managing residential earthworks was a first step, but now we think it's appropriate to manage all types of earthworks, whether they're associated with residential or industrial development or commercial development, but also just the establishment of tracks. So a wider scope, but also a more nuanced approach. And what I mean with that is where there's low risk, low slope, and a big setback from water bodies, we've increased the volume restriction. So some types of activities or some earthworks that previously needed a consent, they no longer need a consent now, provided they meet certain conditions. Bores is also an activity. It's a land use that we have managed under the current plan. It requires a consent, but it is a consent that we cannot refuse, and we can only set conditions on a limited number of matters. Broadly speaking, we're continuing that approach, but we do want to make sure that there is a requirement to meet national guidelines for the drilling of bores, and also that the rules actually ensure that bore heads are better managed, and that bores are existing bores are better maintained as well because of their risk on water quality. Next slide. Wetlands and outstanding water bodies. At the moment, we manage wetlands under the current plan, but the number of wetlands that we're managing is actually very small. We only manage about 170 of them. We call them regionally significant wetlands, and the level of protection that we provide for them in the plan is actually contrary to national regulations and direction. So we set a lower bar than what is actually required by national regulations. So initially, we had a plan to basically bring our wetland management approach in line with national direction for managing natural inland wetlands, and go a little bit further as well, because the national stock exclusion rules, they require exclusion of cattle, pigs, and deer, and we wanted to expand it to other heavy livestock as well. Then, however, the definition of a natural inland wetland changed through a change to national legislation. And that meant that we were actually at risk of losing a lot of wetland areas that no longer would meet that definition. So at the 11th hour, we had to develop a framework to provide protection, a level of protection for those other wetlands that no longer met that definition. So for those wetlands that, strictly speaking, don't fall within that category of natural inland wetlands, we still want to control activities that would cause long-term wetland loss, such as earthworks, water takes, spraying, etc. Outstanding water bodies is something that is new. Our current plan doesn't mention them. And what we've done is basically we have undertaken a big project and basically scanned the entire region for water bodies that have outstanding recreational, landscape, natural character, or ecological values. We've mapped them. Their values will be described in the plan, and there will be strong policy direction that seeks to manage activities that have an impact on those water bodies, those outstanding water bodies, in a way that we want to avoid any permanent loss of those values. We do think that we need to provide for activities where there's only a minor loss, or where that loss could be of a temporary nature, and also enable activities that actually enhance them. There are a lot of outstanding water bodies. You can actually On the website, there's a map that shows all the different water bodies in the region that fall within that category as well. And so the way we're going to manage them is basically through conditions on rules relating to water takes, damming, or activities on the beds of lakes and rivers. On to the next slide. Drinking water protection as well, probably very topical now. That is something we did do under the current plan, or we still do, but the plan is has a limited effectiveness in achieving that. We apply currently some setback requirements for high-risk activities, such as discharges of human sewage, or also animal effluent discharges. We started also identifying groundwater protection zones in the plan, but we've only have a very small number of aquifers that actually are identified as a groundwater protection zone. There are some policies that provide for them, but by and large, most rules don't recognize them. So there's actually no way of protecting those groundwater protection zones. Going forward, we try to provide for the protection of drinking water, basically via two approaches. One was making sure that our broader framework for managing discharges is actually more effective. So by setting land use controls and clear target attribute states and having a broader discharge management framework, we think we can make some gains. But then also we wanted to go a little bit beyond that and actually map drinking water protection zones around registered drinking water supplies. When I say map, that's not really correct. It's like delineating them. So basically what we'll do is we've come up with a bit of a descriptor as to what those drinking zones should encompass, and you can see it there. So a drinking zone would be a radius around bores. And one of the proposals that is currently developed by national government is to have a 5-meter radius. We think for a bore, for a drinking water supply, that is insufficient. So we intend to go beyond that and have a rule that actually says a 20-meter radius. We also want to set a 500-meter radius around a take from a lake. And then when a registered drinking water supply would be taking water from a river, we want to basically control activities within a zones 5 meters from the edge of the river, 1,000 meters upstream, and 100 meters downstream. So that's kind of the zone that applies to rivers. So within those zones, basically what we want to do is have conditions around the effects of certain discharges, or also conditions around impacts of other activities. For example, when you work on a riverbed, you can actually cause a lot of turbidity as well, which would make water unsuitable for drinking water purposes. And then finally, forestry. We don't have any explicit rules in the plan currently. Some of the effects of forestry are being picked up.
Pause for a minute.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Kate. Did you want to talk about drinking water?
Yeah, just to check. I'm just going to check the supply on the drinking water one. So a lot of people have supplies into creeks. We're talking about reticulated water systems or just independent one-off water systems here. Can you go back to that other slide? So just checking. So if one house, as often is the case, just like there used to be a lot of deemed permits that were done for other things, like mining rights to do irrigation, there's a lot of deemed takes, old takes, and I think there's section 274s or something, that just take house water out of creeks, out of neighbours' properties. That's one house.
Yeah.
Would that apply to this, or this is only reticulated drinking systems?
It doesn't necessarily apply to every single domestic take, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we've done is it applies to all registered drinking water supplies. And basically registered drinking water supplies is, it can be anything upwards from 2 houses that are supplied, I believe. For the most part, these are reticulated networks. I don't think that there are many.
So that apply more to the Clutha situation, which has a substantial number of houses on reticulated schemes, but that aren't council. Or
it could apply to it could apply to
that's cool.
private networks.
It's just that the 1,000 upstream is substantial. I just wanted to get that in my mind. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah. So basically, where these zones came from is from a national proposal. So we basically applied the protection criteria that have been proposed nationally. That legislation hasn't landed yet. It's unlikely to land within this year, but we also want to kind of anticipate where things are going.
So there's a question there from Nikki Glaring, which I think you've answered on the chat. God, I've just lost it.
Yeah, so the question, Tom, is there seems to be a very low level of protection distance. Why are we just protecting 5 meters around the bore? Is there anything in there about protecting aquifers that deliver council community supply?
We basically want to protect all aquifers because nearly all aquifers probably provide domestic supplies, drinking water. So yeah, I think that's basically the simple answer to that. Yeah, I don't think we've got enough information to kind of say like certain aquifers need to be looked after and others not because they don't have any drinking water supplies. I do have to say the standard to which you need to manage it for drinking water supply is not, it needs to be drinkable, it needs to be managed so it can be treated for drinking water purposes. So there's a little nuance there.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. It just felt like it was a very low level of protection, that's all. and I shouldn't have put council supply because I agree with you, it should be all aquifers. I haven't read the provisions though, so I should before I comment. As a whole, looking at your land rules as well.
Yep.
Thanks.
And I think we've come to the last slide, forestry. And I started talking about it. We don't have any specific provisions for management of forestry in the current plan, although some of the rules for managing discharges, like rural discharges, especially sediment, they set a higher bar at the moment as the NES for plantation forestry, which is basically the national instrument that under which plantation forestry is managed. And we try to kind of retain that extra stringency going further, but we'll also have some rules to manage the planting of plantation, so plantation and permanent, so carbon forestry. That also includes the replanting. So if you have an existing block, you harvest and you want to replant, the rules will apply to you too. So plantation forestry will be permitted if it's less than 10 hectares, but there will be conditions around setbacks from water bodies, and they're quite, they need to be decent setbacks because of all the machinery that's involved. And also we'll have a policy framework that allows us to consider the effects on water quality and water quantity, and also any ecological values when a consent would be lodged for plantation forestry. While we're trying to restrict plantation or control plantation of exotics, we do recognize that there's a different story to be told for indigenous planting, so be more enabling for that type of vegetation. And I think we've come to the end of the overview of region-wide provisions. We're happy to take any questions or dive into other topics.
So we've got one question from Georgia. Will the new rules provide guidance around forestry and vegetation clearance to avoid a repeat of Skyline? And I'm assuming this is the Queenstown Skyline incident.
Well, it's kind of tricky because we just have a change to the NES as well. And government has announced changes, but the exact detail of that hasn't been revealed yet. But my understanding is that it will deal with removal of some of the slash following harvesting. So it is definitely something that we need to be aware of. The rules that we have currently in the plan, I have to refresh my memory actually whether we deal with harvesting. I can quickly look that up.
I wonder if we might take the slides down, Fleur, so people can see each other a bit more. If they're willing to turn videos on.
Is that good? I can't tell. No, it's not. There we go. That's good. Yeah.
Can I come back to that question? Yeah. So we didn't have any rules on harvesting because the rationale is that the majority of the forestry will be consented, either because they increase the 10-hectare threshold, or because they won't meet the setbacks from water bodies. Because most of the time, especially for smaller blocks, you will see that where they plant forestry is actually on those slopes bordering waterways. So when it comes to a consent, you can set conditions around the harvesting. So instead of having a specific rule, permitted activity rule around harvesting, we try to pick that up through conditions on consents that are granted when they actually plant the forestry. But happy to take feedback on that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I just kind of add to that you know, what happened around Skyline, I guess, is quite new, and it actually happened after we had you know, released these draft rules, but it's certainly something we'll be looking at to see what we can do to prevent something like that happening again. But yeah, as Tom said, kind of really keen to get feedback on that.
So the next question we've got is, what is our position on the control of wilding pines?
I'll just say that wilding pines aren't specifically captured in this plan, apart from kind of preventing its spread from plantation forests. But I gather that Councillor Forbes probably would like to speak council?
Well, I'd love to see wilding pines controlled somehow in this plan, and it's something we've talked a lot about. But it seems to be being falling into more control around the pest management area, doesn't it, Fleur? And I'm not sure how we can do it from this, given that forestry is, well, under some circumstances, a permitted activity. Is there anything around the control of a forest's own wilding potential? Is there anything we can do in there?
There is some stuff around the National Environmental Standard does look at kind of the wilding risk, I guess, for plantation forestry. But yeah, I suppose it's probably a bit early to see how effective that is in preventing wilding spread yet, because it's only a few years old, and most of the plantations were planted well before that. So Tom has got his hand up, so I'm not sure if you wanted to add, Tom.
Yeah, there's policy, actually, like an explicit policy in the proposed plan that basically, when it comes to permanent forestry, so carbon forestry, you're not allowed to plant species that pose a high risk, and so there will be a schedule around that. And when it comes to plantation forestry, there's basically, when they apply for a consent, there is scope to set a condition on there that requires them to eradicate wilding conifers from that forestry, and also, again, avoid the use of certain species that are particularly prone to wilding, I guess. So it's something that we try to manage, I guess, dual approach through pest management plan and then through the consent process of forestry as well.
It's certainly not an easy system. I think Nikki's got her hand up too. Not sure if it's about that or.
No, hey, look, just carry on with the topic. If that's where the conversation's at, I can jump in after if there's time.
Wilding pines is particularly difficult. It's not necessarily a pest, or no species are listed in our pest plan because of our forestry industry. And this is, I understand it. If anybody else has a better understanding, please jump in. Kate, I know you have a good understanding of this too, and there's probably others amongst us that are good. But my understanding is that our control of them is pretty much voluntary. Conducted by voluntary groups with funding through a rate, a general targeted rate that we have, and efforts to get certain species of pine listed in the pest plan haven't so far been successful. I'll leave it there for a minute. Has anybody got anything more to add on that, or a better understanding than my once over lightly?
Definitely not, but I can totally agree. And obviously QLDC spending $500,000 a year, I think, isn't it? So, sorry, I really am speaking now.
QLDC does. It does contribute 500K to that.
An ongoing issue, and government's obviously not stepping up. And I know Gretchen emailed through to the Wild and Conifer group recently, and they were very impressed with her email. But yeah, anything we could do, I'm completely behind it. But I don't have a better understanding, unfortunately. Maybe Kate does.
Well,
you're about to say something?
I don't think I've got better understanding. I think there are opportunities to have best practice and rules in place, and there are areas that circle their pine forest with trees that they are not going to take down, which act as a buffer. The problem is you need to get those up and standing sooner than the trees, because the pine trees take over and outshadow them, or their seeds. But buffers both act as fire control as well as a seed control. It's just a matter of getting them in the right order. And I don't think there's anything in here that deals with that. It also acts as a buffer for sediment control as well. But maybe I haven't got into this area particularly greatly at the moment. And a great carbon sinks as well. I mean, they don't have to be purely native, but they could be native and do a great job.
do know we're getting a lot of comments, a lot of questions about around Fern Hill and Sunshine Bay about how do we get landowners to take responsibility, and people just sort of throw their hands up. So I don't know how that could be addressed in the plan, or if it already is.
Not, as far as I can tell. Tom, do you think it is? Or Fleur? Or anyone else? Sammy, maybe? I don't know.
It's a very hard topic. Like, to give you an idea, when we developed the plan, like you see the chapters landing, and the forestry chapter is the last one to land. The one before that was water quantity, poor Sam. But like yeah, actually the forestry one is despite the fact that it's very small in scope, it's not as, you know, water allocation is much bigger set of provisions. It's actually a really complicated one, and yeah.
I haven't actually heard the Wild and Conifer group speaking about it at the meetings, which is because I'm their rep, which is kind of odd. So I'll raise it with Vanessa maybe. And
well, it's a conference next week as well. They may want to be able to raise something and bring something out of that they might have some ideas for this plan. Joe Ritchie has been working with these sorts of things around the country, I think. So we might leave that one as something we come back to at some point.
Yeah.
The tricky bit as well is a lot of the impacts on forestry kind of manifest themselves further downstream, and often in the estuaries. I mean, that's not particularly relevant to the Upper Lakes Rohe, but like when we look at the areas where we've got most forestry at the moment, it would probably be around Dunedin and North Otago. And there it's all in the estuaries. The NES basically says you can be more stringent than the NES, but you need to link it to your outcomes. And the outcomes that we have, actually, we don't have any target attribute states for estuaries, because so that makes it really, really hard.
And we've got two.
A good time to ask a question around water allocation. I'm always banging on about it.
Sure. We've got two questions just ahead of you there.
Oh,
so
go for you. Sorry.
I'll answer those ones, or get those ones answered first, then we'll circle back to you. So two questions from Kirsty. So the first one is an earthworks question. Is there an allowance for the erection of stop banks in the earthworks section?
So I guess with the earthworks rules, there are permitted activity rules depending on the volume. I don't think we have a particular carve out for stop banks, but I would imagine that it'll be permitted because of the size of earthworks required. Or not, if a lot of earthworks are required, it would require consent. Sorry. Do you need any further clarification about that?
It would also have to be away from any other flood banks and out of any flood prone areas, potentially.
Well, the idea in the past is that the stop banks have stopped flood onto the land, though, Kate.
No, sorry.
Yeah.
Some people put it around their properties within a flood prone area and exacerbating someone else's problem is what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So yeah, so yes, you can generally do it, but there are restrictions not only about quantum, but also where, and it's unlikely to be in your area, but there are some problems about certain areas where you can't do it if it exacerbates someone else's problem, or if it undermines the council's or someone else's flood protection works.
Okay, thank you.
And the second question was the control of lag siphon. And I wonder maybe if you could just expand on that a little bit to help perhaps Tom or somebody answer the question.
Hugo, can I pass that on to you? Or,
I think it's in the regional management pest
plan.
Yeah. Not a land and water one.
It's covered under the pests. Okay.
Yeah, it is. It is a pest. It's covered under pests. We have control mechanisms in place, and money goes into our control LINs, and we do that in partnership with LINs and DOC, I think, Kate.
Well, Hugo's nodding his head, and I defer to Hugo.
Where is he?
on this
Where is
stuff.
Hugo? I can't see him.
Yeah,
Ah,
I'm
there he
here.
is.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thanks, Hugo.
we-
You're much
we
more
do-
knowledgeable on this.
We do it in partnership with Lanes and Doc, and NIWA as well has been supporting all the work. Yeah, but it does fall under the Otago Regional Pest Management Plan.
Can I also ask the wilding pines? It was me that asked a question about that, and I didn't realise till after I put it forward that it came out anonymous. But are the wilding pines mentioned in that pest plan, by the way?
Yes, yep, they
Oh,
are.
are they? How are
Actually-
they?
So there's actually an Otago, there's an Otago Regional Wild and Conifer Strategy 2023 to 2029 published on our website, and it's also under the Regional Pest Management Plan. So I'd say that's why it's not covered under the Land and Water Plan. So there is a web page there which I can put in the chat if that's helpful.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Amber. I had that wrong. I knew we had a strategy for them, but I didn't realise it was actually covered in the pest plan as well. So apologies putting people wrong on that.
Good.
That's why we have Amber and Hugo here.
All right, just looking at the time, we've got about 5 minutes left before we schedule to wrap up. And I think we've got time probably for one more question, which is we were going to circle back to Nikki for a question about, I think, water tank, was it?
It's just around water allocation, and I'm sorry, I'm constantly banging on about it, and Tom might have remembered from previous pre-consultations. Look, it looks like you've gone some way to looking at end use of water takes and considering those things where they weren't previously considered. But I was just wondering about the approach that was taken on water allocation and across the district, obviously not just in Queenstown. Just because it's obviously a scarce resource and it's going to be getting scarcer, and we're going to be seeing more and more competition, and there already is significant competition, and you'll be aware of that. But just around things I've had a lot to do with what's going on in Christchurch and their land and water plan. And we've been thinking a lot about how it could be improved. And one of the things was the definition of efficiency. And I'm just looking at what you've got in here. And you've got some efficiency considerations, but they're still very much around technical efficiency and, wastage. So if it's not wastage and if it's reasonable for the use, which is what Environment Canterbury's got as well, but they don't go into that more economic efficiency, kind of into that sort of depth. So it stays at that sort of, is it wasteful or not level. And so it doesn't allow you, I don't think, to look at different uses of water and the different efficiencies that you can get out of allocating water to different takes. So I just wondered if you consider expanding on that definition of efficiency. And the other thing was to look at different water, like we look at land. So different types of land are good for different purposes. Different types of water is also good for different purposes, depending a lot of it on how clean it is. And one of our goals, sorry, I'm speaking sort of for Aotearoa Water Action here, certainly not as a councillor. One of the things, we're looking at is why on earth would you, take a certain, your cleanest water and use it for irrigation when you could be putting it for drinking water, for example. So it's just that whole different approach to things. And what I see in here is sort of a very similar approach to what we've always done and what other councils do, and not sort of looking outside the square and going, how could we actually manage water better? And I'd actually argue that we possibly need to do what I'm suggesting to achieve sustainable management because of the scarcity of the resource. So just interested in your thoughts on water allocation. I'll submit, obviously.
And I'll start, maybe Sam can jump in. With the efficiency, I think at the moment where we are is pretty much nowhere. I mean, we say we encourage efficiency, but there's no guidelines or anything in the plan. So we try to set some guidelines on certain uses where we can't do that. Like, for example, for the town supplies, it's really hard to kind of put efficiency requirements there. What we will require going forward is some kind of a water conservation plan that basically outlines how TAs will manage, and some of them do that already now. It's not just across the board, like I think the DCC has one. When it comes to economic efficiency and allocating to the highest economic use, I think, well, we're not there yet, but also we need to be careful because there's a tension with local communities, and the people or the users that are probably going to be pushed out of the market first are the small individuals.
I agree with you, and that's why I guess when I'm talking about that, I don't mean I guess the direction from government that you see in the background is sort of towards market allocation, and whoever can pay the most for water must be the most efficient user. I'm not talking about that. When I talk about economic, I'm talking about true economics, so the social and environmental value that you get out of a certain use of water. We don't consider that. No council considers that. It would be a whole new direction, and I guess I'm just throwing it out there that the Otago Regional Council could be the first to actually look at it and go, do you know what, we're not going to allocate based on who can pay the most for water, and as long as you don't waste it, you can take it, you're big enough, you can apply for the takes. Look at the other values, and where we've tried to direct the ECAN is to looking at using water as a lever. You can allocate water or not to an activity, and if the activity is going to cause environmental damage, don't allocate the water. If the activity is going to be great, if you want to do what am I talking about, regenerative agriculture or something where there was once dairy feedlots, it should be, well, it's really dark. It should be really easy. So, using activity status and rules to actually drive environmental outcomes through the allocation of water. I know it's a really novel approach, but I just...
Yeah, to some degree, we're trying to do that through our land use conversion rules. Like, for example, the irrigation, we will require consent for irrigation expansion. And to some degree, that is actually not to some degree, that is actually a way of trying to mitigate that. We're not saying we don't want an irrigation expansion. We just want to make sure that you're not allocating water for use on, let's say, on an alluvial flat, where it goes straight into the ground. And so kind of look at allocating water for projects where we are confident that the impacts, not just on the source water body, but also on the receiving end, are kind of acceptable.
Yeah, no, that's great. Look, like I said, I haven't read through the rules, so I will do that and see how it all kind of pulls together. Thanks.
We'd certainly welcome feedback with those kind of ideas, and so how we might be able to actually put them in place. Because it sounds like some good ideas there. Well,
it's just around how do you allocate water to those other uses. Like you've got Te Mana Utuai and, obviously environment first and water first and then people. And then there's these other uses, but there's no direction on how you allocate amongst those uses. And government didn't want to go there in the Natural Environment Bill Act. So, and I did ask the question of David Parker at one of those zone meetings, and he sort of threw his hands up in the air and said, we can't do everything. So it was too hard basket, right? And now we've got those, undefined principles around water allocation or allocation in general in that new act. But I don't know, it's a work in progress, I guess. It would just be really cool to see ORC kind of, I don't know, leading the way or having a bit of a think at least about some of those things. Thank you, Fleur.
Awesome.
Well, I don't see any further open questions, and we're just slightly over time, so I'll maybe just pass back to Fleur to wrap up.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to say thanks everyone for giving up your evening to come and talk with us and get a bit more information. We would really like to get your feedback through the feedback form, so feel free to pop onto the website and find out more and fill in the feedback form, which is open until the 6th of November. We've also got a few more drop-in sessions nearby, so Wanaka is on Monday, so I'll be there if anyone wants to drop in. I'll be among others on this call, no doubt. But just wanted to say thanks a lot for coming. And I'll pass to Alexa to close us off. Thanks.
I'd like to add thanks to that too, and to staff. You've put so much work into this, and thank you very much for that. It's much appreciated. Let's close with karakia. Kia tau te rangi mare ki runga I ngā iwi o te ao. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Ka kite.